In 1973, Michael Brown and Joe Goldstein at the University of Texas Southwestern discovered a molecule on the surface of liver cells called the LDL receptor. And the reason they discovered it was because they were studying patients who would die at age 18 of heart disease, a disease called familial hypercholesterolemia. So they knew that cholesterol was very high in the blood of these kids who were dying of heart disease. And they figured out it was because they couldn't remove the cholesterol from the blood. They couldn't remove the LDL from the blood because they were missing the receptor. Okay. They then demonstrated that dietary fat raised your LDL level. That's also true. And then other people, epidemiologists, showed that LDL levels in large populations correlated with cardiovascular disease risk, which is also true. So all three of those things were true. But the question was, did they make sense together? And the answer was no, they really didn't. But we've strung a narrative together that we thought made sense. And Keyes pushed, vociferously. Basically, if dietary fat is A and LDL is B and heart disease is C, we learned that A led to B and B correlated with C, so A must lead to C. Therefore, no A, no C. Get rid of the dietary fat, lower your LDL, and heart disease will go away. And Yudkin got thrown under the bus. And that was the end of John Yudkin. All of his work and, his reputation, etc., completely thrown into the dustbin of history. Well, turned out that wasn't true. But it took 50 years for us to figure out that it wasn't true. So it is true that A can lead to B, but it could also lead to D, E, F, G, H, and I and never come back to C. And the contrapositive of an argument is not no A, no C. It's really no C, no A. So it didn't even make sense on logistical grounds. But it took the empiric data, and it took the fact that 50 years of trying to get fat out of the diet only making things worse before people started saying, maybe we got this wrong. And so I happened onto the sugar question around 2007. And so I just happened to be in a good position at the time to be able to make the argument that actually sugar was the bad guy and, Yudkin was likely right. And, things have taken off from there.
Let's take that LDL story even further and talk about what we know today about LDL and separating it into the large and small particle and what science is showing when it comes to heart disease and LDL.
Well, it turns out one of the reasons Keyes got this wrong is because there's not one LDL. There's two. One's called large buoyant, and the other one's called small dense. They are not the same. Now, when you measure LDL, you're measuring both at the same time. The machine can't tell the difference. So your LDL cholesterol is a combination of your large buoyant and your small dense. And it is true that dietary fat raises your large buoyant. But it turns out the large buoyant particle is actually cardiovascularly neutral. It's not the problem. It's not good for you, but it's not bad for you. So dietary fat raises the cardiovascularly neutral species. Small dense is the bad guy. It's so small it gets under the surface of the endothelial cell in the vasculature to start the foam cell formation process, which is what causes the plaques. And in addition, because they're dense, they fall out of laminar flow through the arteries and arterioles, making it much more likely that they will end up causing that plaque. And in addition, because they're smaller, more easily oxidized, and it's oxidized LDL that we've all shown is the inflammatory version. So the small dense are the bad guys. Now, what causes the small dense to go up? sugar. And it turns out that the small dense LDL is actually the evolutionary product of triglyceride made in the liver that then goes to the fat cell, offloads its lipid into the fat cell, and then what's left is that small dense LDL. So triglyceride turns out to be the bad guy in the story, and triglyceride is made from sugar through this process called de novo lipogenesis. But back in the 1970s, we didn't know any of that. But we know it now. But, unfortunately, you still got the American Heart Association and a whole bunch of other, people, American Diabetes Association, still screaming about LDL. Like, it's the major bad guy. And it turns out, it's a lot more complicated than that. And they're ignoring triglyceride. And it turns out triglyceride, the hazard risk ratio for triglyceride in heart disease is 1.8, whereas the hazard risk ratio for LDL in heart disease is only 1.3. So triglyceride is 50% more important in terms of heart attack than LDL was, but you don't see anybody argue, even talking about it. So we have a lot of work to do to educate physicians on what's really important. And, that's part of my job.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
It's poison. And it actually detracts from metabolic health. And we have the data to show how and why. Because fructose